Hi everyone, welcome to a poker vlog with a bit of a difference. Poker with kids.
Fuck it, let's go. Don't tease me. Let's play some fucking cards. He beat me. Straight up. Pay him. Pay that man his money.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 2 of Poker with Kids. This time we're going to throw in a bit of chess content with our poker content after I spent a few days up in Sydney recently. The main reason for heading to Sydney was in fact chess related, both to be involved in the Australian Chess Federation's national conference, as well as to play in the Australian Blitz Championship, which is speed chess. Also managed to spend a few hours at Star Casino there and played a session, and I'll get to that a little bit later in the episode. One of the similarities between chess and poker, and in particular speed chess, has to do with variance, the idea that someone can exceed the expectations that they might have going into an event based on their skill and experience. And this is one example where I was on the positive side of variance in terms of the chess tournament. Managed to finish equal 7th out of the 102 players that played in the event, in spite of the fact that I was coming into the event as the 26th seed. That wasn't to do with, for the most part, any kind of brilliant play or moves on my part. More to do with opportunities that some of my stronger opponents missed, that you would otherwise expect them to see if they had more time to consider their game. Might think about it in the same way to do with poker, that you might have an opponent drawing to only a few outs. They get that one of those handful of outs they do, and a hand that is expected to win doesn't actually win. So the same kind of thing happens in chess, less so in longer games, but with speed chess, where you don't have the extra amount of time to think about a position or a game, that increases the level of variance for the game. To give poker players a bit of a taste of what a blitz chess tournament can look like, it's not always quite as manic as you might see in some YouTube videos, but this is a short clip that I recorded from the final round game between International Master Andrew Brown and Grandmaster Moulton Lai. Moulton actually went on to finish overall second in the tournament, but because a foreigner won the event, he actually is the 2018 Australian Blitz champion, so well done to Moulton. After I finished the chess, I decided to venture over to the Star and play a bit of poker there. But before I get to breaking down some hands from the session that I played, I thought I'd talk just generally about the new room that they've put, well, maybe not so new anymore, but the room they have there at the Star. One thing that I do like about the poker room up in Sydney is its location. Not only is it nearby the big sports bar and a big screen that they have there, tucked in behind the host desk as well, but it also has a bit of privacy about it. It's its own little separate area for poker. Tables all nicely laid out and easy to access. There's also some nice little touches like USB ports on some of the tables, things like that. So although I don't quite rate it as highly as Melbourne's poker room, I do think they have definitely made steps in the right direction to becoming a really top-level poker room in the country. One thing I do when I visit poker rooms, not only in Australia but around the world, is I like to get a souvenir dollar chip. And I managed to do that. Got my self a souvenir of the updated Star dollar chip, which goes from their previous one when they were known as Star City. That's their previous $1 chip, which is still in circulation there, but obviously not as common as the new dollar chips that they have there. So good that I could grab a new dollar chip to add to the collection. I might put that on one of the future episodes of Poker with Kids, the poker chip collection, but we can get to that another time. There's 3 hands from the session that I wanted to look at, but before I get to the actual hands, I want to talk a little bit about the table and the somewhat awkward spot that I actually found myself in at the table. The big problem that I had was to my direct right was actually a fairly active player. He was getting involved in a lot of pots, often coming in for a raise, and to my direct left was actually the big stack of the table who had everybody covered by at least a good $400 or $500. And again, he was also involved in a lot of hands, maybe not quite as aggressive in terms of raising as the opponent to my right, but he was involved in a lot of hands. He was able to splash around a bit, and he was making some hands with cards you might otherwise expect him not to play. In addition to those 2 players either side of me, we had a fairly new player who was about 3 seats to my left, and he made quite a few unusual plays where it sort of made me think that he didn't really know what hand he had, let alone trying to give him some sort of range of hands that he might have. To give you an example, he managed to bet the river after an opponent checked to him. The opponent then check raised him, and he decided to call with Queen High, which on the particular board, which had 3 to a flush, and it was paired as well. Unsurprisingly, the opponent that was doing the check raising managed to have a full house and take the pot. But just to give an idea that we had this player who was doing things like that, betting hands that betting and calling with hands that people might otherwise let go of, but also by the same token, checking and not betting when he had very, very strong hands. So he was a bit of a wild card to throw into the mix at the table. Also, later on in the session, we had another player that sat down, bought in for the max, and was very happy to get his money in, at times very light, and that really helped change the dynamic towards the end of the session. First hand I want to have a look at, I was under the gun and looked down at Pocket Jacks, decided to raise it to $13. We had the hijack, which was the new player, the unfamiliar player at the table. He called the 13, and then the cutoff, who'd been playing fairly tightly, decided to raise to $60. I made the call, the hijack folded, and we saw a flop of Queen 8. I checked it over to him, and my opponent decided to check back. 4 in the turn. Again, I checked to him, and again he checked back. There's one of these spots where I wasn't sure based on the flop action, but after the turn, I probably think I have the best hand with. Pretty confident I have the best hand here with jacks. But with only around 100 behind from my opponent, it really meant that I didn't have an opportunity to bet fold. If I was going to bet, I was really going to put in his whole stack. I couldn't really bet fold in any kind of amount. So if I was going to bet, I was going to be bet calling. As it turned out, there was a 5 on the river, so pretty much a brick. And what ended up happening, again, I just checked the river. My opponent checked back, and jacks were good, so presumably had a hand like ace king or something like that. So good to take that hand down. Thought I'd change things up a bit and go for the car cam. So the second hand that I want to look at from the session at the start sees me under gun +1. I look down at ace king offsuit and raise to $15. The player who's the big stack to my direct left, he also calls the 15. And it folds around to the inexperienced player in the cutoff who goes all in for his remaining $34. This actually reopens, or potentially reopens, the betting, and this is where I made the big mistake in this hand. I decided just to call the 34 rather than making a re-raise to something like around 100 or 120, which would have got me
I'd say heads up against the inexperienced player. As it turned out, calling the 34 also let the big stack in. He also decided to call the 34. We saw a flop of Queen of Spades, 10 of Spades, 8 of Hearts, which went check, check. The turn was 4 of Clubs, again check, check, and the river was 5 of Spades. I checked, and my opponent bet $50. Not a lot of choice. I don't think Ace Kings can really beat much there at all, so I just folded. The big stack rolled over Jack 4 of Spades for a flush, obviously on the flop with a flush draw and a gut shot, turning a pair as well. I don't think he's really getting away from the hand at any point once he sees that flop. The inexperienced short stack who was all in, he turned over Ace-2 offsuit for obviously air, which I could have beaten with my Ace-King. So I think that one I misplayed by not re-raising pre-flop to try and isolate that player. But I suppose it's one of those things. It's, you know, you make a mistake, try and not make that same mistake again in the future. And the final hand that I want to have a look at from the session was actually just before I racked up the chips and left. Not necessarily because of what happened in the hand, but I was planning to leave anyway. There were 2 limps in front of me. I'm in middle position. I looked down at pocket kings. I decided to raise to $15, and I think that might be perhaps a little bit on the small side. I'm not quite sure what the type of sizing I should be looking at putting in there. As it turns out, the big stack to my direct left folds, but the player that sat down bought in for the maximum and had been fairly active in the short time that he'd been at the table. He called the 15, as did the other 2 players who limped. The flop came down 5-4-2 rainbow. It was checked to me, and I bet out 35, a little bit over half pot, which I think is fine in terms of sizing relative to the pot there. And the play behind me called the other 2 that had limped in earlier. They folded, so it was heads up to the turn. And the turn was essentially the worst, probably one of the worst cards, if not the worst card in the deck. It was an offsuit 3, putting out on the board 2, 3, 4, 5. Obviously not what you're looking to have with king, so I've checked it over to my opponent, and he's just thrown in a black $100 chip. I had a round just over 200 behind, so obviously it's effectively committing me to the hand. I don't think he's going to fold if I decide to shove the 210 in. It's essentially a min raise. So with the board on the turn being 2, 3, 4, 5, sitting there with pocket kings facing a $100 bet, not really the ideal situation. So I think I really don't have much choice but to fold in that situation and just let it go, even though it really makes sense for me in a lot of cases to have an ace in that spot. So I mean, I am potentially, my opponent should be expecting a chop, but again, if I don't have the ace, I can't really make the call, let alone if I'm running into a 6. So they were really the only eventful hands I had during the session. Wrapped up down $40 for the night, which is much for much. It's not really much one way or the other, but good to get some cards in at Star while I was up there. That's going to wrap up vlog number 2 for Poker with Kids. Thanks to those people that liked and subscribed after watching the first video. Again, feel free to do the same for this. Hopefully we can build up the audience for the channel, and hopefully we'll have some more videos out soon. Thanks.
Oh, you got poker chips. You got $2. $2. $1 and $1 makes $2. Yeah, I'll show you later. I'll show you later the video.
Huh?
Yeah, I'll show you later the video how it turns out. Yeah.